No confusion.
Hmm?
All right, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of the Village of Cary and the Board of Zoning, Planning, and Appeals, I'd like to hereby call this meeting to order on this Thursday, April the 8th, 2021 at 7 p.m. We now have a quorum of members, both present in Village Hall and also joining online as a hybrid model. And at this time, I'll ask our Director of Community Development, Mr. Brian Simmons, to please call the roll.
Williams, Kretschmer, Graziano,
Present.
O'Loughlin,
Present.
Dudek,
Here.
Jasper, Walrath,
Here.
Corey.
Here. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to rise with us for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. And before we formally begin our meeting, I just want to recognize a couple of our members here, Mr. Rick Dudek and also Mr. Rick Walrath, known as the Ricks. I think you're all aware we had a local election, and I'm not here to prognosticate on the results. But the fact of the matter is, one of the things we've aspired to on this committee, wouldn't it be great if this committee became a training ground and also a launch pad for people that aspire to be elected officials in our community? And two of these gentlemen did so. We have a third member that's not here this evening, but he also ran for elected office. So I just want to say, well done, gentlemen. I don't know what the results are going to be, but I was a really proud moment for our committee.
Thank you.
And for all of the commissioners here and also on the line, I really want to take a moment just to express my thanks for all of you, because the fact of the matter is that the community is stronger because of your service. And I think it's fair to say that you've embraced the idea of continual learning, training, best practices, and there's been some tangible outcomes from that reality, not the least of which has been delivery of the UDO, the 8th associate member. That's been a really good outcome and something that we're all very proud of. And when you come to these meetings, one of the things that I know well is that you'll be fully prepared, you've read your material, you'll review the case, you'll ask probing questions, and you'll deliver your vote. And that's a lot to be thinking about during the course of any examination. And I really appreciate the way you thoughtfully worked through it. And gentlemen, let me just say this as kind of I conclude on this remark, is that as far as I'm concerned, I think you are the unsung heroes of this community, because it's safe to say that most people don't really understand the technical nature of the work that's done here. Some have even said it's arcane. And the fact of the matter is, if someone needs a variance or they need a conditional use permit, a map or a text amendment, we know where they need to come first, and it's right here. And one of the things that I'm always very confident is that you'll have prepared, you'll weigh the evidence, and you'll vote your conscience. And I couldn't ask for more than that. So I just really wanted to take a moment to say thank you very, very much for your great work you do on a regular basis. It's really appreciated. And I know I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Mr. Simmons, because he has been a great supporter of this committee. And the fact of the matter is that in addition to the work that he does for all of us here, he has a day job supporting the rest of the village. And it's really a better community because of you, Mr. Simmons.
Thank you.
And I know you work as part of a broader team. But if you'll also thank the team as well for their support, it's really appreciated. And I obviously have a little bit of a selfish reason for going through this comment, because in addition to some of our colleagues that have run for elected office that may in fact be on the Village Board of Trustees on May the 4th, that early, we have no fewer than 4 of our members that are up for reinstatement on April the 30th. So I'm saying publicly, if you're interested in pursuing a position on the ZPA, please apply. You can work through Mr. Simmons, you can let me know, but there's going to be openings, I think, on this committee. And so we certainly want to have more talent like we have now on this committee moving forward. So I'll just close on that. Unless anyone has any comments they'd like to share around those issues, I'm happy to listen to them or entertain them or discuss them before we move on to the next order of business. All right, so I just want to double check with everyone that you have your packets electronically, and you've probably received them personally via law enforcement. Everybody's in receipt of those?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, Mr. Jasper, welcome to the meeting.
Yes, thank you. Please add me to the roll.
Yes, sir. You're noted, and welcome.
Thank you.
So where we are in the meeting now, Pat, I won't pretend to know where you joined. We're about to
been on the whole time.
review the packet and talk specifically about the meeting minutes from our last meeting. So I'm going to be doing what I traditionally do, which is seek general consent for the meeting minutes dated January the 14th, 2021. And those in favor of approving those minutes will say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. And now we're going to move on to our first case. And what I should tell the petitioner here is that I want to make sure that you know the lay of the land here in terms of how we do business. Typically, Mr. Simmons will give an overview of the case. Some of the commissioners here may have questions for Mr. Simmons. And then we would open it up to yourselves if you want to present additional commentary or color to the case. Then we may have questions for yourselves. And then we close that portion of the meeting. We open it up to the public. And we do have at least one person here publicly representing the public. And there may be others via the Zoom application. So we give those people the opportunity to speak. And then we close that portion of the meeting. We may have some additional discussion around the petition, and then we take a vote, and then that vote gets delivered back to our elected officials who become the final arbiter. But the reason for working through that process with you is that because of the number of people we have here, we want you to know personally that not all of our members are present. And on one of the requests that you have, specifically the variance, you need 4 positive votes to move forward. And if for some reason that was declined, I think you would have to wait 1 year to move forward. So the reason why I'm bringing this up for you is to let you know that if for some reason it was declined, you'd have to wait a year. If it was approved, obviously it would move forward. But you could also say you wanted to postpone this meeting because not all of the members are present. So that's your decision. I'll give you a couple of moments to discuss that and let us know how you want to proceed. I just wanted to be transparent about that with you.
And let me just clarify one point. So with the variance request, you would need to have at least 4 votes to get a positive recommendation from this board. So if the vote is a 3-2 vote, even though it has a simple majority of the members that are here, technically that's a negative recommendation to the village board. The 1-year time period wouldn't start until after the village board level. So if the village board denied the request at that level, you would have 1 year from that time period to reapply for that same variation request. So it's more, if you want to delay to wait for the entire board, you can, or if you want to pursue it this evening, you certainly can as well. Or have the discussion, present the case, see how it is discussed. And if there's possible modifications that need to be made, or if you see how the discussion's going, you can make a decision at that point if you want to call the case for a vote at that point.
And let me try to help you a little bit further with this. I'm not sure which way you want to go, and I can't ask the members in advance of the case which way they would be leaning. That would be obviously illegal. Mr. Simmons, if they were to postpone, when do you think the next potential meeting would be to hear this case?
It would be the first meeting in May, so May 13th, I believe is the date.
Okay. So I'll give you a few moments to review that together, and we can make a decision. No pressure, no rush.
If I could add, do we have 5 members present?
Well, we have 2 members that are on the telephone.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
how many total members do we have then present?
For clarification, for the map amendment request, we have the alternate member that we have on the board. They can vote on that request, so you potentially could have 6 members voting on the map amendment for the rezoning. For a variation under state law, it can only be the 7 active members of the board, so the alternate member can't vote on that. So you only have 5 members that potentially can vote on that variation request.
So I
We
don't.
need 4 out of the 5 to vote yes.
To have a positive recommendation, yeah. But so yeah. Yeah.
Then one other question. If you get a 3-2 vote, let's say, in this,
On a variance.
negative vote,
It would fail.
it would fail, but can they still go to the board at the next meeting?
Yes.
And
Yeah,
the
it would-
board could override that.
Yes, they could.
Correct. Correct.
But if it
And
gets declined there, as you know well, it will wait a year.
Fine there, that's not a good situation.
Right.
So you understand that, right? Is there any question or concern about proceeding? You don't know, I don't know.
We can't do a straw poll?
Well, as I mentioned, I think I understand if I was in that position, which way you folks leaning, it would be illegal for me to even consider that. I'm sorry, but I can't consider that.
Situation.
Yeah. And just so you're aware, Bruce, one of the gentlemen that are sitting here, since we haven't seen each other, we have an 8th associate member on the ZPA. We did that specifically so that we could always have a quorum, because we were running into circumstances sometimes that we didn't have a quorum. So the law states on the 8th associate member, on a variance, they're not allowed to vote by state law. So let's create some of the little haziness around how we're doing this tonight. So we're going to probably have to split how we vote on the application. One will be a map amendment, and then the other would be the variance.
Okay. Well, you take your chances. Unless you're feeling you don't want to. Okay, well, let's let it unfurl here.
All right. Okay, so if I'm hearing the petitioners correctly, you would like to proceed based upon your discussion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this time, I will now call Village Case Number 21, ZPA 03001. The petitioner is All 4K9 Cuts and Colors. The owner is W&D Joint Venture. The request is for a map amendment rezoned from R2A to B3R and a parking variation. The location is 15 2nd Street, South 2nd Street. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Simmons for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As mentioned, the request is related to the property located at 15 South 2nd Street. The petitioner is proposing to relocate their existing business in the Village of Cary to this location. Brief overview, the subject property is zoned R2A single family residential. I think it mentioned they're requesting 2 approvals this evening. One is for a map amendment to rezone the property from the R2A district to the B3R district. And then associated with the proposed use would be a parking variation for the existing number of spaces that are on the property. A little background on the property. It was originally part of the village corporate limits when the village incorporated in 1993. In 1938, the existing building was constructed on the property and was utilized for a telecommunications office. There in the 1980s, the property was sold to School District 26, which used it as administration offices for the district. And then the property was again sold in late 1990s and in 2000 received approval for a use variance for an office use in the R2 single family residential district. Should be noted the property was originally developed in the R2 district, which at the time in the 1930s was a multifamily residential district, which did allow certain office uses. Since that time period, although the R2 designation has not changed for the property, obviously our code requirements have changed for that district, which now only allow single-family uses and associated service-type uses that would support single-family residential. As mentioned, the petitioner is proposing to relocate their existing pet grooming business, which is currently located in downtown Cary. The proposed use is not a permitted use within the R2A district, nor is it allowed under the use variance, which was approved for the property back in 2000. The petitioner is proposing hours of operation, according to the documentation that was submitted in the packet, of Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And Saturday and Sundays from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. The business would operate primarily on an appointment basis, with customers coming to the facility at specific times for appointments to have their pets groomed, and they would not have any overnight kenneling on the property. The proposal is seeking a map amendment to rezone the subject property. As the board is aware, as you can see by the image on the slide, the property is adjacent to the B3R district, which fronts onto Route 14. The existing property within the subdivision just to the south of that B3R district is the only property in the area that actually has a commercial building or use constructed on it. The rest of the subdivision consists of single-family homes. So the proposal to rezone this property to the B3R district would be consistent with adjacent zoning to the north. It would allow for more retail and service office land uses on the property, consistent with that designation. So currently the use variance that was approved for the property in 2000 only allows general office uses in this building. So the petitioner or property owners had difficulty selling the property based off the limitation as far as uses that can go in there under that use variance. The recommendation or request to rezone it to the B3R district would expand the number of uses that potentially could go in the building, including a pet grooming facility, which is permitted use in the district, but would also allow other potential retail or office uses. As indicated in the slide, the purpose of the B3 district is to further the purposes of the B3 district regulation. However, the B3R district was specifically designed for this area along Route 14 to provide a mixture of land uses. It allows slightly less commercial uses than the B3 district, but also it does recognize somewhat the historical character of the area and also existing residential uses which exist along that frontage, so that the district does allow a mixture of uses, both commercial and single-family residential, and then certain other uses, single-family attached as conditional uses as well. The bulk requirements are shown in the lower right-hand image of this slide, are fairly similar to existing requirements due to the nature of the B3R district. It does take into effect or consideration adjacent properties as far as land uses. So setbacks, if they are adjacent to a residential property or across the street from a residential property, would be same as that residential district's requirements. So as you can see, the front setback, exterior side yard setback, and interior side yard setback requirements would not change from the R2A district to the B3R district. The primary changes would be the rear setback, which is the northern half of the property, and then also the lot coverage, which is the existing lot coverage on the property is actually that maximum percentage. So with any land use designations or map amendments that are proposed, the village also always refers to our comprehensive plan for guidance. In this case, the existing commercial building has a land use designation as a single-family detached, which is consistent with the remaining residential area surrounding it. So that land use designation is looking at the future desired use for the property, but does not look at the existing commercial land use designation on the subject property. So in this case, the recommendation would not be consistent with the comprehensive plan. However, the B3R district would still allow for the development of single-family uses on that property should it ever be redeveloped and not go through a map amendment prospect if approved this evening. The second request, which is being sought this evening, is for a parking variation related to the proposed land use. With the change in land use under code, the property would be required to provide spaces for the increase in spaces that are required. In this case, the existing office building is required to provide 12 spaces for its use, and there's currently only 6 spaces that are provided on site. The pet grooming business would actually require additional spaces to be provided for per code of 15 spaces based on the size of the building, and with the 6 spaces that are on site would provide a deficit of 9 spaces, which is the variance that's being requested this evening is to reduce the required on-site parking from 15 down to that 6 spaces. However, the petitioner is proposing to construct in the right-of-way of 2nd Street an additional 6 spaces, and since those will be located off the subject property, those cannot count towards the parking provided on-site per code, so the variance would still be from 15 to 6. However, the total number of spaces that are proposed for the project would be 12, so it'd be a net decrease, if you will, of 3 spaces. Per the information that was provided by the petitioner, the proposed spaces along 2nd Avenue would be intended to be utilized primarily for customer parking, for drop-off and pickup operations, and the 6 spaces that are on the lot would be utilized for their employees. By constructing the 6 spaces, it would limit the impacts on the adjacent residential area for potential vehicles parking on the roadways and accessing the property for the proposed business. It should be noted when the previous use went through the zoning process in 1999-2000, this plan that is shown here was proposed as part of that project. The plan was approved as part of the village's review of the project. However, those spaces were never formally constructed. So this plan is referenced here is dated from 1999, but the petitioner is proposing to, as part of their project, construct those spaces in order to provide additional parking for the proposed use. As with any standards or requests that are reviewed by the village, there are certain standards that have to be met. And for the map amendment, this slide summarizes those standards. The petitioner did provide a response within their documentation as far as how they believe the proposed use complies with the standards. Specifically, the use is consistent with the existing uses of property within the general area of property in question, consistent with the zoning classifications of property in the general area, and the property not generally suitable for uses permitted under existing zoning classification, to summarize a few of them. As mentioned, the property is adjacent to existing B3R zone properties, as well as the existing R2A district, and under the current zoning classification, a number of uses that would generally be considered appropriate for commercial use would not be allowed within the property. Second, there's variation standards, or standards exist for variations. Specifically, the hardship was caused by unique circumstances related to the land and not the general conditions of the district. The applicant has not taken any action that has caused the extraordinary condition. The relief proposed will not alter the character of the locality. As mentioned, the proposal decreases the number of spaces on the property from 15 to 6. However, the petitioner is proposing to construct an additional 6 spaces in the right-of-way that would mitigate any potential impacts that would occur to the surrounding residential property areas. Therefore, if the zoning board determines that the various standards have been met in this case, it is recommended that the ZPA make 2 motions in this case. Specifically, 1, to recommend approval of the map amendment to rezone the property located at 15 South 2nd Street from the R2A single-family residential district to the B3R fringe business residential district. And 2, to recommend approval of a variation to reduce the required number of off-street parking spaces from 15 down to 6, subject to the conditions that are listed in the staff report. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have, and the petitioner is here to provide additional testimony as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. So allows us to pause here to see if any of the commissioners have questions for Mr. Simmons.
I'd certainly like to ask a quick question, Brian, about you referenced the comprehensive plan a couple of times. Mm-hmm. In reviewing that, I didn't see this particular neighborhood really come up specifically in either one of the sections in the sub area downtown or the sub area of the Eastern Gateway. So it's kind of hard to peg it in and say, our long-term comprehensive plan is looking for this type of environment in that area, because it's not directly related to either of those. But I guess my question, which kind of a little more of a comment, would you feel that considering it's already being used in what might be reasonably argued in the format that we're being asked to approve, it's pretty much being used that way already, Would you agree that this really won't impose any change on any of the neighborhood, any of the people that live in that area are not going to see a dramatic change in their neighborhood that they're currently living in?
Yeah, it was from a planning perspective, generally the property is operating currently under what's called the use variance. So the village in 2000 approved a variance specifically for the property to allow office uses to locate within a residential district. And that variance looked at the history of the site and how it had been utilized. Generally, use variances are not a recommended action from a long-term planning perspective. The best activity would be to ensure that the property is in a proper zoning district from that perspective. So if there's uses that the village sees as appropriate for that building, office or retail or other types of uses, generally should be the zoning should align with the use of the property as far as what type of use there would be. So I think the comprehensive plan, as you mentioned, has specific sub areas that got more of a focus on or more direction within the plan. This property did fall kind of between two of those. But overall, the plan in general does look at the village as a long-term planning document, a 20-year type document, does look at what are the future type of uses that you'd like to see in those properties. And I think this property was designated for single-family detached based off the neighborhood around it. So I think long-term that may be the path that the village still would like to see from that perspective. But the existing use of the property and how it's been developed is more of the commercial aspect, which is consistent with the adjacent properties just to its north.
And I think that's an important part, even enough so that I'd like you to pull up the district or the zoning map again so we can see the individual parcel, so I can make my last point. Thank you. Mm-hmm. If you see the portion that isn't red on the coming down 2nd Street there, since it's already, the property is already being used in some sort of a retail or office space type environment, it really is a continuation of that B3R versus if we were 3 or 4 lots down and across a little bit more in Ross or something, to where you'd be truly having a difference of both neighbors or on either side are expecting something different. So, it seems to be a continuation of what's in the immediate surrounding area.
Yeah, and also you can look at an area of the site. You can see also from how the site is buffered from the residential area. It does have, the driveway comes off of 2nd Street, which does have significant screening on the east and south sides of it that buffer that use from the adjacent commercial district as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walrath. Gentlemen, any other questions for Mr. Simmons?
I do.
Mr. Graziano.
Brian?
We're going to go with Mr. Graziano, then we'll go with Mr. Jasper.
Go with the.
Mr. Jasper, go ahead.
What is the property directly adjacent to the east of it?
Directly adjacent to the east, as you can see on this slide, is a single-family home, which is directly to the east on Ross Avenue.
Okay, and the other parcels continuing east are all residential homes?
That's correct. On Ross Avenue, with the exception of the subject property, all the other properties which are on Ross Avenue in the north or south side of the street are single-family residences.
Do we know, and we probably can't because of privacy issues, but do we know whether those properties are investment properties or are the main residents of the people in the property?
I don't know that specifically. I do know a few of the homes in the area are residences live within those. I don't believe they're all rental within that subdivision. There may be a few instances that are rented, but might be able to look from the map, the mailing for the property if the owners are.
Okay, and one final question then. Directly across on 2nd Street, that's a residence, I presume, and not a business?
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your previous question, just looking at the property owner listing, the majority of the homes in this area, it looks like the mailing address is for people that live in this subdivision. I would say the majority of the homes there are probably owner occupied.
Okay. And the
Anything
property
else?
directly across the street from them on Second Street is also a residence and not a residence used, or a residence used as an office?
That's correct. It's a single-family residence.
Okay. All right.
Anything
Thank
else?
you, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Jasper, and now we'll move over to Mr. Graziano.
Yeah, mine is more of a technical type question, I guess, for lack of a better term. ADA requirements. I believe 1 for 25.
Yeah, for the number of spaces. Mm-hmm.
Okay, question being, the existing parking lot obviously has 1 handicap space in it. Is that going to stay? Well, I guess the way I'm looking at this, we're calling it 6 spaces to the south of the building is the existing, and there's apparently one handicap space in there. The ones that are being built on Second Street are technically not on the property. Therefore, that makes them public spaces and cannot be designated for a specific entity, so to speak. It's public parking on the public way. That would not require an ADA space, a handicap space.
That'd be correct, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So technically, playing the game.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
They could be building 7 spaces if one of them is not designated handicap.
That'd be correct, yeah. It's the on-site parking with the 6 spaces, they would be required to provide at least 1 space.
Correct.
That would be closest to the entrance door, which is where the space is currently designated. But certainly if the parking space on the right-of-way would not be required, they potentially could build a full 7 spaces there.
I would do it this way, but if we're looking for 1 extra space,
Sure.
Okay, so I haven't lost my touch yet.
No, you have not, Mr. Graziano. Did you have any other questions or comments, Mr. Graziano?
No, and I think Brian explained it in that he says this actual site plan is from 1999.
Yes.
And that's why it doesn't match the aerial that shows a public sidewalk going all the way across. So
Yeah, and-
that was going to be my other question about public sidewalk, but it's out there, so.
Yeah, and I think, and that's one of the conditions staff's recommending is that the plan, if it is approved and goes forward, that the plan be revised to show how that connection would continue through the
Okay.
property, so that that walkway can be massaged around the proposed parking spaces.
Very good, sir, thank you.
Gentlemen, other questions for Mr. Simmons?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Mr. Dudek?
Brian, what else, by changing the zoning, what other kinds of businesses could be located in that area?
The B3, I actually got the list here. It's more limited retail uses, so retail uses would be allowed within the district.
So would they be businesses in general that might need more parking, might cause more traffic? What I'm driving at is, you're changing a bigger area for one business, and then that sort of opens up the doors for other property owners there to do, they could sell their property and somebody could buy it to do a similar business, and all of a sudden you start to really change the character of the area. And maybe that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying that it potentially could lead to a lot more traffic, could lead to other parking problems. They already have an acknowledged parking problem. Would other businesses in that same area have the same thing, and where would they put the extra parking?
Yeah, I'll mention the proposed use is probably the most intensive from a parking requirement for that district that we can have proposed. The majority of the uses that would be allowed, I can just run through the list, is a bank without a drive-through would be a permitted use. A drive-through would have to go through a zoning process to get approval, which based on this configuration would not work in this location. But other service-oriented business offices, medical or dental offices would be a permitted use, so an office type operation. Personal care services, so hair, nail or tanning type establishment. Service repair, small appliances would be permitted, pet grooming, retail sales in general, a bakery, ice cream store, those types of retail shops would be permitted. Restaurants, I would say, those would require a zoning process to go through, so a restaurant would not be a permitted use in the district, it would be a conditional use. So if that type of use were to be proposed in this building, should it be supported for rezoning, would have to go back through a zoning process. For your question as far as other properties that are on the street, if they were to convert to a business use or want to sell it for business use, those uses would have to go, in order to allow that, they would have to go through a zoning process to get approval for that. So what a decision is made on this property would not potentially apply to other properties on the street if that were to be pursued from that perspective.
So you're only changing the zoning on one parcel?
That's, yeah, they're just requesting a map amendment for this specific parcel, would not apply to anything else on Ross Avenue or any of the other properties in the area.
And then I'd ask the petitioner, how much larger is this building than where you're currently at?
Mr. Dudek, will you forgive me? What I'd like to try to do is keep our comments to Mr. Simmons, and then we're going to ask the petitioner to add some additional comments. I just want to try to keep some kind of flow to this.
I do have one final one for Brian, and it's related to the parking requirements. Help me understand why, in my mind, a general office operation would require more parking than a pet a grooming operation. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just thinking that an office has employees that are there all the time and, perhaps people that visit. I guess I'm just not understanding why the requirement for general office is actually, you have to have fewer parking spots. I'm sorry, fewer parking spots. I was right the first time. For general office than you would for a pet grooming business. That to me seems backwards.
Yep, I can appreciate that. I think it's the parking requirements that we have are generally based off engineering studies that have been performed by the Illinois, or the Traffic Engineering Institution. They do studies nationally on land uses and have developed what are the appropriate numbers to have for certain land uses. In this case, I would say an office use, generally you may not have as much customer traffic coming to the facility, where you would have staff that would be working there within the facility that may be more permanent parking options, but would not have as much customer traffic depending on the type of the office that it is. Certainly certain offices could have more. And a pet grooming business, you would have more of that customer interaction coming to the property, and as proposed here, by that appointment schedule, you will have a more larger influx of vehicles coming to the property than you would have for a general office type use.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Dudek. Mr. O'Loughlin, did you have any questions?
Sorry, I was muted. No, everything was pretty much covered. I will have one for the petitioner, but that'll come later.
All right, so I have a couple for yourself, Mr. Simmons. So if you could pull up the map, the zoning again. I just want to double check a couple things. So behind them, all of that shaded is right behind them is B3R.
This sir? Yes.
Yeah. So just the reason for asking, it's not noted by code there, B3R, but everything behind them is effectively B3R. And then my other question for you, Mr. Simmons, is we were looking at the list of people that were noticed and I'm just asking yourself, and I will ask the petitioner the same question. Did you receive any feedback from any of those people that were noticed about concerns regarding this request?
The village did not.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this time, and forgive me, is it Miss Lulo?
Lalo.
Lalo, thank you very much. And Mr. Barrett.
No, Barrett's been here. This is my husband, Ken Wagner.
Nice to meet you. Again, our congratulations on your recent wedding. This is your opportunity now to bring us, and I would simply ask that when you approach that you would state your name and address for the record, because this does get recorded if you're not aware.
Business address or home address?
You can use either. If you want to provide additional commentary or color around the application, you're welcome to do so at this time. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Angela Lullo. I'm the owner of All for Canine here in Cary. The business address is 212 West Main Street in downtown Cary. I quit my full-time job in June of 2012 to pursue running my own business, and a lot of hard work, but I've been very lucky and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to have such a great business and hopefully expand my business. And that's what I'm trying to do with this new property, bigger location so we can offer more services.
Okay. Did you want to offer anything else before I open it up to the commissioners?
I don't think so.
Okay. So gentlemen, Ms. Lello is now available. So Mr. Laughlin, I'll start with you first.
My question was what you asked, Brian. Did you receive any negative impact from the surrounding or negative responses from the surrounding properties?
No, I haven't received any responses from anyone regarding those notices that I sent out.
Okay, thank you.
I know Mr. Dudek was going to ask a question to the petitioner earlier, so we'll go over to your side now.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a feel for how much larger this property will be for your operation than where you're at now. That's all.
Yeah. So it about triples my square footage.
It's quite a bit bigger. Okay.
Yeah.
I'd certainly have a comment, and I want to commend you. This is about as good an application as I've seen. It's absolutely very, very well done. And then a comment to you on behalf of just myself. We need to do everything we can with our current local businesses to help them stay viable. And if you're in a position that tripling your business is an option, then I think we certainly need to highly consider helping you do so. And if some small step by doing this, I think that we want to do everything we can to keep you here in Cary.
Thank you.
Mr. Graziano?
Yeah, I just got one. I'm pretty sure I know where your location is along Main Street because I always kind of looked over there and I said, damn, that's an odd location for a dog grooming business. But my question is actually, how many parking spaces do you have at your existing location?
So we have shared parking. The building that I'm currently in has 5 units. And we share the parking lot with our neighbors, the Cary Ale House. And then there's also the 2 apartment buildings in the back of the parking lot.
Okay, so it's the whole...
Yeah, directly in front of us, directly in front of the 4 units, there's 6 spaces in front of the 3 on the side, and then like 3 spaces on the front unit. So essentially we share 6 spaces between 3 units.
Okay, so even 6 spaces is a step up.
Yeah, it would be great to have that additional parking.
Okay, thank you very much.
Nothing else, Mr. Graziano?
No, I'm good.
So, Ms. Lello, I do have a few questions for you, and they really revolve around parking. And so in order for me to kind of understand that, maybe you could take us through, in a given week, month, you've had a lot of experience in your business, how many customers would be coming to you? I'm trying to understand your demand.
Yeah.
And I'm also trying to understand your hours. I'm assuming you go from A through Z in a business day, and if you could articulate what that is also, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so our first employees arrive at 7 to set up and get the shop ready for the day. Typically, the first customer arrives between 7:30 and 8. We schedule our grooming dogs on the hour. So like 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., we generally have 2 or 3 groomers working at a time. So on those hour appointments, those groom dogs would be dropped off. On the half hours, we schedule our bath dog appointments. We generally have 1 or 2 bathers working at a time. So then, like on the half hour, we'd have 1 or 2 dogs drop off. And we schedule our nail trim appointments on the 15-minute interval. So the 15s and the 45s. We do 1 customer per nail trim. They may have, 2 or 3 dogs, depending on the client. So generally, like 8 a.m., we'll have a groom dog drop off, 8:15 nail trim, 8:30 bath dog, 8:45 nail trim, 9, and then it repeats. Our last dogs generally drop off 2, 3 p.m. depending on the day. And drop off is generally, right now we're doing curbside because of COVID. So they pull up, we go outside, check them in, bring the dog in, they leave. Then as soon as the dog is completed, for nail trims, they stay. Nail trims take less than 5 minutes. So for the nail trim, we bring them in, do the nail trim, bring them right back out, and they go. For the bath dogs and groom dogs, they leave, and then depending on how long, bath dogs generally take 45 minutes to an hour, groom dogs generally take an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then usually about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes before the dogs are completed, we send them a text message, your dog's ready for pickup, and they have an hour to come pick their dog up.
Very good. So what I'm trying to do here, Ms. Lugo, is set the table for parking, because obviously you have a number of employees.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm really trying to understand is that they need to park their vehicle if they drive a car someplace.
Right.
So I'm assuming, and I don't want to make any assumptions, that your employees drive an automobile.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to double check, because some take public transportation, or some may even live close by. So I don't know, on a given day or week, how many you anticipate would be physically at your location?
So we generally run like a morning shift and an afternoon shift. I also have employees who work off-site. So we also do dog walking and in-home boarding. So those employees never come to the shop. And then we have the girls that work in the morning, and then they work like the first half of the day, and then the girls that work the second half of the day. So usually, we usually have maybe 5 or 6 employees at the shop for the morning shift and the afternoon shift, depending how those hours run and how busy the day is. Some of them may overlap, but we typically don't have more than 7 or 8 employees at a time at the shop.
So that would be in addition to yourself?
I come and go.
Okay.
I do both like in-home and pet sitting and go to the shop. I'm all over the place, so yeah.
So I guess this is really kind of the central question around parking, because there's 2 different elements. There's the map amendment that you now understand, and then there's the parking. And so if you have potentially 8 employees working in a given time frame, where do you anticipate those people are going to be parking? They're not necessarily going to be parking in the 6 out front, because I'm assuming you're saving those for customers.
Right.
And I know not all of your customers would be there simultaneously. They're kind of coming and going in 10-minute increments, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But I'm really sincerely trying to understand your employee parking.
Right. So we have the existing parking lot that has the 6 spaces.
Yes.
So we're going to utilize that for employee parking.
Yes.
In the event that, we have overlap and there's a couple, like we may need to temporarily use one of the employee or the front parking spots.
Yes.
But for the most part, they would just be in that existing parking lot.
Okay, and the reason for asking this, Ms. Lello, is that one of the suggestions I'm probably going to add to the petition is to try to put some timeframes on the parking.
Okay.
Because what we wouldn't want to find out is that you have people in the neighborhood that just come and take your parking spaces and park there all day long.
Yeah.
So we're probably going to have to consider that as commissioners here, some timelines. And so if we said the parking was from 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 or 6 in the evening for your business, is that going to be sufficient, or does it need to be longer, or can it be shorter?
No, like I would say 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. would be more than enough.
Okay, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. would be more than enough. And if we limited the parking to 1 hour, would that be sufficient?
Yeah, it could be 15 minutes, but yeah, an hour is more than enough.
Will that be up to the commissioners to determine when we get to that portion? So those are the questions that I had, Ms. Lovell. So thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
So gentlemen, before we close this part of our meeting, any other questions, comments for the petitioner?
Nope.
No. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is the time where we actually now do open it up to the public. We have a gentleman here. And I think I'm going to open this up and we'll turn the mic over to yourself.
Bruce Kaplan, 312 Bell Drive in Cary, the real estate broker in the transaction, so I am wearing a couple of hats here. Actually representing both the buyer and the seller. The seller, the Barretts, I've been working for the better part of a decade to try to sell that building. And the question is, why is it so hard to sell this building? And there's probably a number of different reasons, but the primary reason it's an office structure, and we're in an economy where office buildings are not doing well. And the office property type that I deal with on a regular basis is the absolute worst property type that I deal with. And a lot of it recently has to do with COVID, as people moved, out of offices into their homes. But literally this office trend has been going on for 10 years or so. So it's been an extremely difficult building to sell, to find another office type user for it. So when Angie first approached me about wanting to stay in Cary, she had a local business, is doing very well, needs to expand. Where can I move to? Looking around for the options, they were very, very few, almost non-existent. I mean, this literally was the only building out there that made any sense whatsoever. And so that's why, I kind of directed her in that direction. One of the things that she did say about tripling her business, well, part of that tripling involves a larger retail component. She does retail sales at her business. You didn't really mention that, but there's, products that she sells that, generate sales tax revenue for the village, which, because she's expanding that portion of her business as well, that could be a benefit to the village. Historically, when this building was bought by School District 26, it was bought for administrative offices, but they also had their school board meetings there. Mm-hmm. And if you know how many people show up at a school board meeting, including the board members, they literally flooded that neighborhood with cars. And so the residents didn't like that. But when the current owner bought the building, I think the village board was at the time asking them about building these extra spaces, in the event that whatever their business involved needed more spaces. They didn't happen to need more spaces, so they never did it. But the village board was in favor of, in fact, encouraging of those additional spaces to be built at that time. I think, as she said, most of their businesses is drop off and pick up. So other than the employees who might work a shift, there's not a lot of cars that are sitting there all day long. They come and they go. So it's not maybe as intensive as other types of retail businesses might be. But even the types that Brian was alluding to that could be in there, other types of retail businesses, they tend not to be heavy car uses. The only other thing I want to say is I do this kind of work in communities all across McHenry County, variances, zoning changes, special uses, and I have never had as much help and assistance as I had from Brian in putting this petition together. So I wanted to thank you personally for going above and beyond to help us, walking us through this. A lot of times you have attorneys that'll do these things, and in this case we didn't have the luxury of that, so he was extremely helpful in making this happen. I appreciate it.
Yep. Well, we're in agreement with that, Mr. Kaplan, and it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, I want to double check with Mr. Simmons to see if there's anybody that's joined us via Zoom.
There's nobody attending via Zoom.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. So at this time, I'm going to close the public portion of the meeting. And gentlemen, though, before I call the motion, I just want you to know that my intention here, unless someone has any objection, is that I'll probably call the map amendment first, and then we'll do the variance unless someone has a better idea. And before I do call the motion, do you have any questions about this case that you'd like to discuss further?
Mr. Chairman?
Hello, Mr. Jasper.
A couple of things. One thing I just noticed, and if you don't mind, I'll call back the petitioner, but they said they didn't do any boarding, which is fine, but I do see within the plan that's up here, a daycare. Could she expand upon that?
Yeah, the petitioner's back at the microphone, Mr. Jasper, so we're going to give her a chance to respond to your question. Go ahead, Mr. Wu.
So we offer cage-free grooming services. So when a dog is dropped off, In the event it has to wait for its turn to be grooming, it would go into the daycare area. And then once it's completed, while it's waiting for pickup, it would go back in the daycare area. So the majority of that room's usage is for that. We do have 1 or 2 dogs that do occasionally come for a few hours during the day for daycare, but it's a very minimal amount. It's 99% the groom dogs.
Mr. Jasper, could you hear those?
We don't have to be concerned then with outdoor space for, walking the animals or getting the animals outside to do their business or anything like that?
No, for the most part, no. If dogs are ever there for a couple hours, we do take them outside. There is a grass area in the front, and I do plan on putting one of those poop pickup disposable things there with poop bags, which is what we currently do now. If we walk the dogs, we pick up the poop, make sure it's disposed of properly, and keep the area very clean.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jasper.
I can add to that real quick.
Was there a follow-up?
Mr. Jasper, I'll just add to that as well. I've talked to the petitioner regarding the daycare operation, and it was based on my discussion with her, the way that staff is reviewing the daycare operation is accessory to the primary use of the grooming business. So it's not say operate in the future, should the use change there, more of a kenneling or a doggy daycare type operation, that would not be permitted under the zoning approvals for the business. It's an ancillary part to their existing business operation, but the primary business here would be a pet grooming business. So if the business model ever changed in the future to that type of use, it would have to go back through zoning process for additional entitlements.
Okay. Thank you very much. I do have one question for Brian, if I may.
Absolutely, Mr. Jasper, go right ahead.
The parking out front, when you were analyzing this and taking a look at it, now it's pull in, pull out parking. So they're going to, when they leave, going to have to back out onto 2nd Street. And then pull away. They're not pulling out of a parking lot, or it's not a drive-through of any kind. Is there any concern about disruption of traffic, especially within a residential area? That you've got vehicles arriving regularly throughout the day, pulling in and pulling out. Any thought given to how that's going to disrupt the neighborhood?
Yeah, that's a good question. From a street parking standpoint, the design here is similar to parking that's located more within the downtown core of Cary, where we do have along various roadways, there are parking spaces that are actually on street or in the right of way that would have vehicles, pulling into and backing out into the traffic lane. So the design from that perspective is not different than what you would see more in the downtown core area or more of a downtown environment. From the residential perspective, it's not a highly dense area. It's a few single-family homes are in the back area, so this roadway does not see a lot of traffic from that subdivision routinely. And then there's just the one property that's directly to its west, the single-family residence. It does have a driveway directly across the street from the parking, so there would be a limited on-street parking in the area that would impede the traffic flow. And I think, as mentioned in the staff report, the east side of the street currently is signed for no parking. But by constructing these spaces in the right-of-way and having vehicles pull in, it would still maintain an adequate width for vehicles, two-way traffic to come in and out of the subdivision should a vehicle be parked on the west side of the street.
Okay. I see I'm looking, one of the advantages of not sitting in the room with you guys is I'm looking at Google Earth here. And I believe I see some foliage, some kind of tree or something at the corner of the lot to the north. Is that going to impede sight lines?
Yeah, that's something we can review with the construction of the parking spaces. I believe you're referring to this area, this plant. There's a existing bush that's in that area. We certainly can review that, and if if that would be impeding sight lines for vehicles coming out of that space, that would be blocking visibility towards Route 14. But they'd be pulling into the traffic that'd be going in the opposite direction there, so they'd be looking more towards the south in general. But certainly, if something is recommended for approval, we can review that with the petitioner to verify if a sight line needs to be corrected to make sure that vehicles can see adequately down the roadway.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jasper. So before I call the motion, gentlemen, any other questions that you wanted to address? All right, then. The chair will entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of a map amendment to rezone the property located at 15 South 2nd Street from R2A Single Family Residential to the B3R Fringe District Residential District.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any additional comments or questions on the motion? Mr. Simmons, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Graziano?
Yes.
O'Loughlin?
Yes.
Dudek?
Yes.
Jasper?
Yes.
Walrath?
Yes.
Corey?
Yes. Okay, gentlemen, now I'm going to call on the variance, and I think you know Mr. Walrath. You know the situation here. The chair will entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees a variation to reduce the number of off-street parking spaces from 15 spaces to 6 spaces, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Before we actually call the motion, I'd like to suggest that we put some framework around when these spaces are available for use.
I would agree to amend the motion. Yeah, to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dudek. And I'm not 100% sure who seconded the motion.
I did.
right.
Frank O'Loughlin.
Are you
Yeah,
comfortable?
I'm good. I'm good with that too.
All right, thank you very much. So this is an open question, gentlemen. I think I heard the petitioner talking about when her business was operating, and just at a high level, I was thinking that we limit the parking from X to Y every day. I don't know if we need to change things on the weekends or not for an hour to crack, but I'm open to suggestions around this. I want to be as flexible as I can to the petitioner, but I don't want to find out that someone's using those spaces that are not using the business. And if we don't put some framework around this, I think we may find out later that we're running into a problem.
If I may, I would recommend potentially just putting a time restriction on it as far as the duration that a vehicle can be parked there, as opposed to an hour between 8:30 and 5, and then also a time restriction on top of that, just from an ease of enforcement or understanding. I think it would be better to, if it's a 30-minute time period or something along those lines, would be the best to have that type of restriction on there.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, Mr. Simmons, if we've had placards, I'm assuming that's what we would do, that said that the maximum amount of time you could park in a space would be 30 minutes, an hour. That would be the limit. And gentlemen, do you want to get very specific? Do we want to say 30 minutes? Do we want to say an hour? Or I'm open to suggestions around this.
I think we have to defer to the business owner for what's appropriate.
I don't disagree. So if we said that someone shouldn't be parking there, Mr. Lugo, for not longer than 1 hour, do you think that that would be appropriate?
Yes, that's appropriate.
Okay. Then I think I'd like to amend the motion to include 1 hour parking in front of the property. Okay?
Is that 24 hours a day, Mr. Chairman?
Well, that's another question, and thank you, Mr. Graciano, because I think if I heard the petitioner correctly, they're not open 24 hours.
Correct.
I, again, keep.
I mean, if I'm living at, 287 East Ross and I'm having a party on Saturday night, boy, I'd sure like to use those 6 spaces.
So again, I guess, well, this is a little bit unusual for us, for the petitioner, because we don't normally go back and forth like this, but if we were to say the spaces were only available for the 1 hour use from A to Z, and they were open from other times after you closed, is that going to be acceptable to you?
Yes.
Okay.
And may I say something about what he said?
Sure.
Because I do share a parking lot with the bar, and they frequently come in the morning with cars left over. And like, obviously, yes, by all means, you're my neighbor, we're not open, use the parking, no problem. But I guess it's not the same as a bar where somebody's gonna get drunk and leave their car for 3 days. We just had that happen. But yeah, with those, either way, with the time restraints, I think it's adequate.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, though, it's, for clarification, that's your property. People are parking on your private property.
Is it though?
Yeah, the right-of-way would be considered village property. The 6 spaces that they're constructing in the right-of-way would be still considered village property, similar to downtown. So the spaces that are along Jandis Road or Spring Street, technically the businesses utilize them, but they are in the right-of-way for the village, and we're responsible for the maintenance of them. In this case, one of the conditions staff is recommending is that there be agreement that's executed between the property owner and the village, so they'd be responsible for the maintenance and of those spaces. But generally, they still would be something that we would have to regulate from an enforcement standpoint, any parking restrictions that would be in there.
Well, I mean, I don't want to have a sign that's 5 feet long with all these different requirements on it, but Jim brings up a very valid point. You don't want somebody to be parking there for a prolonged period of time, but nonetheless the business is closed as of 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever it is. I don't know if we have any current signage, Brian, that limits by amount of time and then says, after X hour, that doesn't apply. I mean, that's a unique sign. I don't know if we have such an animal yet.
Yeah, we don't. And that's generally what I would recommend is that there's the time limit as far as how long a vehicle can be parked there. And that's similar to what there is currently in the downtown area. There are 15-minute, 30-minute spaces that we have there. I do appreciate that, if somebody wants to utilize those spaces, they might be able to park there beyond that hour time limit. It becomes an enforcement issue if the village wants to enforce that.
Yeah. I think for simplicity's sake, leave it at the time frame for now, the minutes, and see how it is. And, if all of a sudden the police department starts writing a ton of tickets, then I suppose somebody's going to come back to the village board and complain about that. And you'd have to take it up then.
Yeah. And I think into this conversation, condition C that staff was recommending was that, that it be encouraged for the short-term customer parking, and that signage to identify those areas, may be encouraged as needed. So if it's a 1 hour restriction that this board is recommending, we can certainly leave that condition in and recommend that, that time limit be in there, but also still allow for flexibility should the use of the area change. That does allow the village to modify the signage without having to go back and go through a zoning process to amend that condition. But certainly if the general direction of the board is a 1 hour time limit, we can work with the petitioner on that restriction and develop the agreement for the use of those spaces to have that restriction within it. And then if the use changes over time where an hour is no longer appropriate and we realize it needs to be 30 minutes or 15 minutes, it allows the flexibility for us to make that change.
Can I ask a procedural question, Brian? I don't want to beat this sign to death, but ultimately this is going to go to the village board where the police chief is going to be in attendance at the meeting.
Okay.
And to me, he would be the best individual to be providing input, because he's got to adjudicate the signage, right?
Right.
His officers are going to have to go and perhaps give somebody a ticket that says, I'm just here, to visit my neighbor or what have you, and the business is closed. So can we somehow or other create the request, the amendment to the original motion, so that the final language of the sign perhaps is just going to be blessed by the chief in terms of the ability to monitor and enforce it?
Certainly.
That way we don't have to, it doesn't fall on us, because the police department's the one that has to enforce that, and we don't have a representative of the police department here.
Well, Mr. Dudek, can I ask a question a different way? I'm not in disagreement, by the way. It's a little bit unique.
Yeah,
It's a little bit unique. I found myself recently going over to the doctor's office on Main Street, and I'm very certain that when I do that, there's a parking restriction placard that says 2-hour parking, period. And I'm sure that gets enforced. And what I don't know is that if you're there at 10 o'clock at night, what happens then? I don't know that. And so if we're saying 1-hour parking only, I think you can enforce that. And I'm unclear on Main Street where we say 2 hours only, and you're there, you leave your car overnight.
Sure.
What happens? I don't know.
It's an enforcement issue. I can respond to that. It's if the 2-hour restriction is in place, it's 2 hours, 24/7, 365. So it's more an enforcement issue. So you're playing the game. If you park there for longer than 2 hours, you potentially could get a ticket if the police are there and they are enforcing that restriction at that time period. But I appreciate what Mr. Dudek is proposing is if you generalize the recommendation that there be a time limit established, per, and maybe languages, with consideration with the police department from that perspective, we certainly can leave that open-ended. It's the recommendation of this board to put in some sort of restriction that's reasonable, and then we can work with the petitioner and that condition, if should it be supported by the village board as well, to make it enforceable from the village's perspective. Sure.
Is it like an option to say 1 hour parking during business hours?
Well, I think the issue is, Mr. Lalo, and I'll defer to Mr. Dudek on this, I thought the parking issue might become the issue. I think what we're talking about here is that regardless of what we put on the sign, it becomes an enforcement issue. And I think what Mr. Dudek is suggesting is that should we have the wherewithal on this committee, rather than come up with specifics around the parking regulation, is to further review it once it goes to the village board. I think that's what's being proposed, so that we get a subject matter expert that's involved in parking enforcement to say this is more or less what's being proposed. Is that going to work? And if we said after business hours, well, certainly. And then we'll have to define what business hours is, and then the person that's parking there needs to understand what after business hours is. And then I think that's what Mr. Dudek says. We're going to end up with a laundry list of regulations on your sign out front of your property.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're trying to potentially avoid here.
Yeah, I think your suggestion may be the ultimate answer. But again, to me, I think that's a police department needs to weigh in on this, because we don't know. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't know. But I like that suggestion.
If I may, what I might recommend is the condition C is restating it to say off-street parking spaces in the existing surface lot on the property should be reserved primarily for employee use.
Yes.
And spaces in the Second Street right-of-way encouraged for short-term customer parking with appropriate time restrictions as determined with the village's police department.
Is that acceptable?
As you said it, yes.
Okay, very
I would
good.
amend.
Yeah, I like that.
All right. So gentlemen, again, before we beat this up a little bit further, is there any other questions around this before I call a motion?
No, I just got a comment. Realistically, we put 1 hour parking there. It's at the discretion of the guy in the black car out there, what he's going to do. Technically, I should be getting a ticket every time that we come to these meetings because I'm parked under one of those signs that says 15-minute parking out here.
Well, Mr. Graziano, this is probably the inappropriate time to say we want to talk to you about your parking habits, but, no, I understand your point.
Jim, you also have to remember that parking enforcement, especially with signage, it's also up to officer discretion. So, I mean, you're gonna run into a point where we put up a sign there, for a 1 hour parking limit. On a Sunday when they're not open, is an officer going to necessarily write a ticket for a car that's been there for 2 hours because there's a party going on across the street?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I just said.
Not. He's gonna, but if she calls and says, hey, there's a car in one of my spots and it's been there for 3 hours, then they're gonna come over.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I said.
Yeah.
All
Okay,
right,
we're
gentlemen.
good.
So unless there's anything else to add, I'm going to call the motion, gentlemen. So I just want to double check with everyone. We're good?
Yeah.
All right. So the chair will entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees a variation to reduce the required number of off-street parking spaces from 15 spaces to 6 spaces, subject to the revised conditions listed in the staff report.
So move.
Second.
We're
good.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Simmons, would you call the roll, please?
Sure. O'Loughlin,
Yes.
Dudek,
Yes.
Jasper,
Yes.
Graziano,
Yes.
Corey.
Yes. So to Ms. Lillo, you have a favorable recommendation on behalf of the ZPA. And the way the process works now is just to stay in coordination with Mr. Simmons. I think it's pretty clear that he's been particularly helpful on this petition. And I don't pretend to know which meeting this is going to be reviewed next.
The April 20th meeting, as we discussed, so with the unanimous recommendation from here, it'll be on the consent agenda at that meeting. So it's likely that there may not be any additional discussion, but just in case, I recommend you potentially attend that evening as well, just to be able to respond to any questions that may come up. But generally, those items are voted on without any additional discussion.
Point of order, that being said, that there may or may not be any discussion at the board meeting, are we to assume that you're going to talk to the chief and?
Yes. Yeah, so the condition will still requires that they work that through.
That's fine,
And condition also requires an agreement to be executed as well, which would need additional approvals as well.
For the maintenance.
Correct.
All right, so before we close out this portion of our meeting, I do want to extend our congratulations on your recent nuptials. Congratulations. I don't know when you're leaving for your honeymoon, but I don't think it's before the 20th now.
No.
Yeah, all right. And we'll wish you continued success with your business.
Thank you.
And, we have a dog. Maybe we'll have them over there visiting your business in the not too distant future.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And nice to see you again, Mr. Kaplan. I don't know if you're sticking around. We have another application from the village here. You're welcome to listen to it if you choose.
Too close to my bedtime.
All right, understand.
Thoughtful consideration and comment.
All right, well, nice to see you again.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, so,
Yeah, thank you.
thank you very much. Nice to meet you both.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, so our second case tonight, I'm not exactly sure who the petitioner may or may not be here, is from the Village of Cary. And this is going to be for 755 Georgetown Drive. And the request is for a conditional use for an electronic message monument sign. And at this time, I'll ask Mr. Simmons to give us an overview of the request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The request this evening is for a new monument sign that's proposed at the new Municipal Center complex, which is currently under construction at Georgetown Drive and Industrial Drive. Get this out of here. Pardon me, I have different screens on my screen that you're not seeing. The subject property is Zone B3 Fringe Business, which allows the Municipal Center complex, which is currently under construction, as permitted use. As part of that project, the village is seeking to install a electronic message center sign on the monument sign for the property that would advertise community events and various happenings within the village. Brief history of the property: was annexed into the village in 1985 as part of the Caper annexation for the Cimarron subdivision. And in 2003 was subdivided as part of the William Caper Jr. subdivision, and is currently has the new municipal center complex being constructed on the site as we speak. Come on. There we go. The proposed sign would measure 46 square feet, total square feet in area, and it would have a electronic message center display of approximately 17.5 square feet. That would equate to 38% of the total sign area as permitted. The sign would be located on the corner of Georgetown Drive, which is the north-south street on the west side of the property, and Industrial Drive to its north. So it'll be visible from both roadways, but primarily traffic traveling on Georgetown Drive. As with all electronic message center signs within the village, there are certain conditions that require their operation or their use. Specifically, they're only permitted on monument signs in the Unified Development Ordinance, and that the EMC portion of the sign cannot exceed 40% of the total allowed sign area. As mentioned, this sign will comprise of 38% of the sign's surface area. Only static messages can be provided, and then there are limitations as far as maximum illumination levels for day and night conditions. The proposed sign will be operated in accordance with those conditions. As with any request, there are various standards that are within our ordinance that need to be met to support the request. Specifically for conditional use, the use will not substantially diminish or impair values of property in the immediate vicinity or impede the normal orderly development of surrounding property. The petitioner did provide a response to the standards within the packet as far as how the sign will comply with those standards. It's similar in design and nature to other EMC signs that the village or that exist within the village today. So should the ZPA determine that the various standards have been met in this case, as recommended that the ZPA recommend approval of a conditional use to the village board for an electronic message center sign for the property located at 755 Georgetown Drive, subject to the conditions in this listed in the staff report. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the request.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. So gentlemen, questions for Mr. Simmons? So I'll take a first swing at this one, Mr. Simmons. It was really, I've heard from being in Village Hall from time to time that it was being discussed at one point, I don't know if the ship has sailed, that the address would be referred to as one municipal center. And as it relates to calling the motion, obviously it says 755 Georgetown Drive. So I don't know if you have any visibility on that, or is that someone kidding around? I don't know.
It was, yeah, from an addressing standpoint, the two cross streets are Georgetown Drive and Industrial Drive. So naming it, that would require renaming one of the streets from a perspective.
Very good.
And also just from an addressing standpoint, it's in the 700 block of that roadway. So
thank you very much for clarification. So that was my only question, gentlemen. I don't know if anyone else has one.
Yeah, mine is pretty simple. Brian, what is a precision tooled plaque? The sign by the company that did it has an arrow B, and B says precision tooled plaque. So I'm just curious what...
Village seal?
that's the village seal.
No, I understand that,
Yeah.
but what's it going to be made out of?
I believe it's a metal product, so it'll be like laser cut. I have more design information on that. I don't know if that was completed in here, but that would be similar to what's it going to be inside the village building, village hall building. It's multiple layers of materials that'll be created to give depth to that portion of the sign. So it project maybe 2 inches, in depth, but it'll have different materials on it that'll give the color scheme for the village and also shading and whatnot for the village logo.
So will you or the village board be presented, or have they already been presented with an example of, when I think about a plaque, I think of something bronze, something impressive. And that's why I asked the question, what do they mean by precision tooled? What kind of materials? Will it be readily apparent? Will it be rich looking? I mean, you have an $11 million building and a sign that's out in front that, you know, we've needed years ago to have a message center sign for our village hall, and it's a 20-inch diameter plaque. It's pretty sizable. I'm just curious how, I wouldn't want it to look cheap, I guess that's.
Yeah, it won't. I mean, from knowing what's proposed inside the building and what's proposed outside it's high durable materials, metal materials, that'll be, you know, laser cut and designed from that perspective. That'll, from work with our architect team on it, the sign has been designed in a way that mirrors what's on the building. Also, the style of materials that are proposed on the sign will match the building and complement the two from that perspective.
Okay.
Be a high-class sign.
That was the only question I had.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Dudek. Anyone else before I call the motion? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve a conditional use for an electronic message center sign for the property located at 755 Georgetown Drive, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Dudek.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Graziano. Mr. Simmons, would you call the roll?
Sure. Dudek,
Yes.
Jasper,
Yes.
Walrath,
Yes.
Graziano,
Yes.
O'Laughlin,
Yes.
Corey.
Yes. Well, you have a favorable recommendation, Mr. Simmons.
I was sweating that one for a
And
while.
I guess you know how to proceed from there.
Yes.
Surprised the hell out of me. Huh?
So before we adjourn, gentlemen, I just need to double check with Mr. Simmons what the next meeting would possibly be. Do you have any applications in the pipeline yet, or?
Do not have a formal application that's been submitted, so I've talked to a few residents that may be submitting, so there might likely be a meeting in May, which would be, that's obviously the second Thursday, I think is the 13th, if I'm not mistaken. So there potentially could be a meeting in that month. But I don't have no positions that have been submitted formally as of yet.
Okay. So, gentlemen, unless you have any other questions or comments, I'm going to get ready to close the meeting. We'll watch with interest to see where the election results will lead us.
Eventually.
Yes, they're still pending, apparently, so we'll have to wait until tomorrow. And so with that, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting.
You got it.
Second.
Second.
Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned, gentlemen.